What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get
Running
to
gear.
it.
Braking system. I would like to write that brakes at BMW, as always, are perfect. But, unfortunately, E60 in this respect can throw up surprises. Vacuum booster housing corrodes on the most part of cars. It's beautiful, aluminum and unpainted, which often causes vacuum leaks. The housing is cheap even in the original, and in the updated version it will be steel. You can also put a part from the newer 5F series, reinforced and painted. And suddenly many times more expensive parts from M5 turn out to be the same as on powerful versions of E60. The GTC comes in different diameters, but it is not unique on the M5, and the vacuum booster differs only in blue color and price. Brake tuning with the installation of mechanisms from more powerful cars, a frequent phenomenon for Bavarians. And here some more entertaining examples are revealed. For example, washer spacers from Gazelle recommended by former tuners of E60 for installation of caliper. Now it is clear why Gazelles drive so aggressively, because in a lot of BMW cars there is a part of this indomitable beast. Eternally beating, overheated, squeaking and sluggish brakes. This is also about E60, though here much depends on the driver and choice of components. Original discs with original pads are in fact very different from any other prefabricated kit. The surprisingly perfect performance of the original brakes is extremely difficult to replicate on another set of components. The quality of braking is highly dependent on the pads, and sometimes there are unfortunate discs. It must be taken into account. Structurally, the brakes are quite simple, calipers with a floating bracket and 1 or 2 pistons. But the dimensions are impressive, even if we forget about M5 with its giant brake discs of 374 by 36 mm in front and 370 by 24 mm in the rear. On more mass 550 at 535D stood 348 mm discs with thickness of 36/30 mm depending on the market and model. And even the People's 530 has 324 mm brakes, which mass cars can only dream of. If you're keeping an eye on your car, an unexpectedly important design element may be a vacuum pump, which is present on most E60 versions. A lot depends on its capabilities. Without the help of a vacuum it is extremely difficult to apply such large brakes. And complaints about insufficient braking system and bad pads often actually refer to the work of the electric brake vacuum pump. The handbrake here is conventional, with a lever, cables, and drum pads inside the main disc. Usually it is without surprises, except that for drift fans its resource will not be large. On older cars it is worth watching the brake pipes, and on the front axle they can also suffer. And also pumping of brakes here without dealer scanner is very complicated. It will not be possible to pump by old-fashioned way. Detail original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 17,274 8 13,928 Techstar 5 839 brake pads rear 7 138 7 986 Techstar 4 388 brake disc front 310 by 24 15 191 87 445 Mintex 4 430 brake disc rear 320 by 27 968 86 724 Techstar 4 347 suspension. For all seeming open work and fragility, the suspension of E60 is strong. At normal style of movement and on Moscow roads, many elements live up to 200,000 kilometers. Many, but not all, except for stabilizer rods, suspension springs, hubs and controlled shock absorbers. Springs, unfortunately, are just very weak and are often found broken off. The struts hold up better, but with mileage over 150,000 it won't hurt to check them. Especially since they not only wear by mileage, but are also prone to aging and are sensitive to the quality of storage. Aluminum levers with ball supports can often be found original on cars with mileage under 400,000, except that the silent blocks will definitely not survive. The minus here is essentially one, aluminum poorly dampens shock loads, and the first open manhole, pit or curb will finish the lever. If the ball is worn out, then in addition to simple replacement, there are many options for restoration, including very reliable. The diameter of the support ball is sufficient, and the lever is fat. Four-wheel drive cars traditionally have their own suspensions with changes not only in the front, but also in the rear. The differences are not great, but all levers and hubs in X cars are unique. The shock absorbers do not last very long if you do not put additional dust covers. The resource strongly depends on the quality of roads, but it is necessary to prepare for replacement after 60,000 kilometers. And they do not last more than 150,000 kilometers. If shock absorbers are controllable, the price of repairs grows multiples. There are no surprises in the rear suspension. The multilever is less reliable than the front C-Fersen, and repair is more expensive. The ball bearing, aka floating silent block, is not the most successful unit at all. It has weak dust covers. Ball joints on small and crooked levers are strong here, and silent blocks on the levers wear out earlier. But often it is better to change the lever assemblies, because in thin aluminum silents are pressed very badly. And don't forget that the subframe silent blocks also need to be replaced. Cars with the dynamic drive option have active stabilizer bars. A hydraulic motor, similar to a paddle-shaped phase control valve, can change the angular position of the two halves of the stabilizer, but relative to each other. As a result, the stabilizer actively prevents roll in corners and on rough roads does not interfere with the articulation of the suspension, which improves ride smoothness. The system works with its own pump on the type of pump in ABS block. The liquid is taken from the circuit of hydraulic booster. And everything would be good. Hydraulics is a reliable thing, but the developer of the stabilizer did not make an external seal, and moisture gets into the sealing zone of the working chamber. And then, corrosion and depressurization, oil leaks from the system and replacement, because the design is not disassembled. Everything is welded shut, and there are no spare parts. Some skillful people carefully erase the factory welding, restore the shafts and put new seals, but here everything is non-standard. And a lot of manual work. Consequently, the chances of error are high. The average locksmith shop usually can't handle such a task. Otherwise, the system components are reliable, except that the sealing of the hydraulic tubes gets rotten over time and the system may leak, but this is rare. The price of an active stabilizer is from 250,000 rubles, and it is almost useless to take a used one. The problem is age-related. And if the spare part is removed from the car, corrosion makes the shaft even faster. And usually right after installation it starts to leak, even if it did not leak before removal. Not surprisingly, most cars just get a regular stabilizer when the active one breaks. It costs 30,000 new, and second-hand is many times cheaper. Steering on these BMWs, the racks don't live long. There are many reasons: tires of solid size, rigid silent blocks, and large angle of caster. All of these factors combine to put a lot of stress on the rack. And the location of the rack in the subframe, where it is constantly overheated or flooded with water, also does not contribute to a long life. It is highly advisable to use the recommended fluids in the system and change them on time, as well as check the seals regularly. Repair of a usual rack will cost the usual amount, from 10 to 15,000 to 30,000. Power booster pump from Shniva fits perfectly in E60, except that the length of banjo bolt is too long. BMW has 14 mm and in Shniva pump 10 mm, but it can be easily treated. However, most of the owners do not advertise that they have parts from VAZ, or do not know that the service decided to buy a Bosch pump not for 38,000, but for 6,000. The trick to the E60 is that most of their rack and pinion is active. This is such an amazing design that it deserves a separate story. There is a usual hydraulic booster, but on the incoming shaft between the rack and the steering wheel there is a small planetary reducer, divider. One of its branches rotates the steering wheel, and the second, the electric motor. They can drive the input shaft of the rack together and separately. What's the point? If the electric motor is disconnected, the rudder turns the rack, and the only difference from a conventional one is a more smeared reactive action due to friction in the gearbox. But the system can spin the rack even if the steering wheel is stationary. If the electric motor is rotating, it turns the epicyclic gear and, depending on the direction of rotation, increases or decreases the number of revolutions on the output shaft. As a result, there is no rigid connection between the rotation of the steering wheel and the wheels. This is presented as a variable steering ratio, but in reality we simply have two steering wheels, one for the driver and one for the electronics. This allows you to do what modern EPS can do and even a little more on a conventional steering rack. After all, EPS is rigidly tied to the ratio of the rack. From stop to stop there is always the same number of revolutions, and in this case the system can change the ratio, adjust the trajectory in turns, take the car out of the skid and prevent drifting, bypass obstacles and automatically park. Finally, there are exactly two problems with such a system. The first is the complexity of mechanics and electronics. The second is the complete lack of spare parts for this unit. The gearbox is not made at all for centuries, and wear of planetary elements is present in many people. Someone miraculously gets spare parts and the gearbox and rack are rebuilt. But the price of repairs does not decrease with time, but grows. So far there are enough used elements, good from right-hand drive cars. The node is also suitable. But already now the active rack can be considered as one of problematic nodes of E60. Transmission. General problems. There are no specific and widespread problems in this part. In powerful versions, the rear gearbox fails, although not too often. The rubber metal joint of a cardan rolls up, but it is a typical trouble of all BMWs. The suspension bearing is not especially resourceful, as vibration will tell. Mechanical boxes. It is possible to find a car on mechanics, and the 6-speed gearbox is excellent. 2-mass flywheels somewhat dilute the joy of owning an exclusive version of the E60. Low resource and high price. Somewhere after 100,000 flywheels can already knock, and after 200,000 such history at idle speeds is rather a norm. There are no problems with restoration, though repair is simple, but not cheap because of prices for spare parts. Welding the flywheel on diesel cars is highly not recommended. The cardan clutch will die very quickly. Automatic transmissions. The bulk of the 5 in this body is equipped with automatic gearboxes. ZF Series 6 HP of the first generation. For all gasoline cars with inline motors and with 4-cylinder diesel engine, 6 HP 19 in different variants is intended, and all more powerful versions, except for M5, are equipped with reinforced 6 HP 26. The boxes of this series were the first automatic transmissions with a mechatronic, a control unit inside the crankcase, and a very complex kinematic scheme, which made it possible to get 6 gears at a very low weight. This is the case when the brains of the box know everything about it, what pressure and response time each package has, what is the working pressure and maximum pressure, what is the oil temperature in different parts of the box. The thing is that kinematics works perfectly only at clear coordinated work of at least 3 actuating units, which means that the requirements to the quality of the control system are maximum. This is solved by advanced feedback and powerful electronics. Unfortunately, such an excellent design also has its drawbacks. For example, the plastic filter cover is too delicate and the filter is expensive. Fortunately, there is a steel cover with a replaceable insert filter. The heart of the design, torque converter, in all series is designed to work in sliding mode, has a multi-disc friction lock inside. At the same time, it does not cope very well with work without locking, it overheats. Blocking, on the other hand, is an unsuccessful prioritization. Full lockup is almost never engaged. Controlled slip was used on the first generation of 6 HP boxes to reduce torsional vibration. As a result, the oil in the box is heavily contaminated with friction wear products, and when oil characteristics change, overheating or solenoid wear and dirty oil wears out hydraulics quickly, the lockup starts to work hard, adding loads to the transmission and accelerating friction wear and oil contamination rate. In 6NR26 series boxes GDT is also weak, and it is impossible to put a larger one. The load on the GDT is usually less in the 19 series boxes, and the problem is not so acute. In general, the RDT has been improving all the time of this ACP production. In the second generation of 6NR boxes, the GDT has been improved by the introduction of a damper and in combination with new algorithms of lockup operation, oil contamination has been reduced. But these improved transmissions, 6NR21 and 6NR28, were not installed on E60. Small lifetime problems of the box due to a bunch of rubber seals, e.g. points, rubber hydraulic accumulators and high operating temperature also cause a lot of trouble. Late versions with updated software can be considered very reliable, provided frequent maintenance. And they are good for high loads. GDT lock copes with drifting and acceleration to the floor. There is a reserve for strength of the mechanical part. In any case, 8-speed boxes of the next generation are much gentler in this respect. If you want to read about specific examples of breakdowns of this box, then welcome to the article about Jaguar XF, in which we have analyzed in detail construction. The M5 was also equipped with a 7-speed robot GS7 S47BG. The design is pure racing, single clutch, and surprisingly strong. More often dies the dual-mass flywheel or breaks something small from hydraulics or electronics than the main mechanical part. The operation of such a transmission is tied to the operation of the engine, and together they provide the owner with a fair amount of headaches. But it is necessary to understand that M5 is not slow. And comfort of traveling on such a box is far from that which is provided by ZF6 HP. Four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive cars are plentiful, but some sort of cult following has not developed. They have differences in both suspension and bodywork from the rear-wheel drive E60s. The drive is plug-in. The ATC 300 and ATC 500 transfer cases are similar to those used on the E53, and the problems are exactly the same. The splines on the front cardan are knocked off, the electric drive has a weak gearbox, and inside the transfer case itself, the friction clamping mechanism has a very important roller bearing which, in case of rare oil changes and overheating, can fail and drop the rollers right into the gears. Unlike the E53, no one has experimented with installing an ATC 700, but perhaps it will fit here as well. Motors. General problems. Bavarian's motors can be either loved or hated. Some engine models are hated even by those who like BMW in general, but this is more of an exception. There are a lot of motors on E60, and all of them are hot, complicated, with expensive spare parts, but resourceful if well maintained. Even Monster V10 on M5, if you change liners in time and don't skimp on throttle repair and fresh oil, can go a long way. But starting with this particular generation, diesel engines began to noticeably outperform gasoline alternatives in terms of practicality. All the engines have already been covered in detail in reviews of other BMW models, from the E53 up to F01 petrol engines. The list of motors is very long, which creates some confusion with the series. Before the restyling, the 520i was a 6-cylinder model with the M54B22 engine, 170 horsepower. In the engine index, the numbers after B denote the real working volume of 2.2 liters. After restyling in 2007, this version received an inline 4 N42B20OL or N46B20 in the regional version, for the same 170 horsepower. The 523i version appeared in mid-2005 with a 6-cylinder motor N52B25UL, 177 horsepower, and since 2007 it received N53B25, 190 horsepower. The 525i version was equipped first with M54B25 engine, 192 horsepower. From 2005 it was replaced by N52B25OL, 218 horsepower, and then in 2007 came N53B30UL with the same 218 horsepower. The 528i version was present in some European markets from 2007 with the N52B30 engine in the 231 horsepower version. The 530i version debuted with the M54B30, 231 horsepower, with the N52B30 motor, 255 horsepower, in 2005 and the M53B30OL at 268 horsepower in 2007. Since 2007, 535i with Turbo 6 and 54B30, 306 horsepower, was produced. More powerful versions of the car are already equipped with 8-cylinder engines, 540i with N62B40 engine, 306 horsepower, 545i with N62B44, 333 horsepower, and 550i with N62B48, 367 horsepower. The top-of-the-line M5 is equipped with the V10 S85B50, 507 horsepower, atmospheric, on-throttle and very specific in design. The 4-cylinder motor is not recommended mainly because of very high firmware clamping and structural complexity, which together create a lot of problems on the plane. It has throttleless inlet, direct injection, very high temperature of thermostatization, so the motor is more expensive and more complicated. in maintenance of low-volume 6s of M54 series. It cannot compete with them in terms of resource, and there is no special economy on fuel. However, with a cold thermostat, replaced injectors and thoroughly serviced, and even with a chip, it is not so bad. It is also worth to put a normal dipstick instead of a faulty electronic one, so as not to be left without oil through its fault. But the car is old, the motor is probably not in the best condition, and in the end there is little point in buying it. It is unlikely that you are a fan of BMW racing 4s and will enjoy the sound of the rectotorque and force the engine to 200 plus forces. In everyday use it is just a problematic and boring option. 6-cylinder engines of all series are quite good, although they require a lot of money to keep afloat. Perpetual replacement of clutches, seals, crankcase vented valve covers, oil pan seals, etc. But in general these are not bad motors with rare exceptions. The most powerful versions please not only with sound, but also with adequate traction. But the rule, the newer the motor, the more money it asks for and more often breaks, is quite observed. Popularly favorite M54 is the simplest and strongest. The block outside is made of aluminum magnesium alloy, cooling jacket is aluminum, cast iron liners, direct injection, adequate operating temperatures and Varno system, of course. And the same $1 million life with good maintenance. Plus few trouble spots and cheap spare parts. However, piston rings are coked at overheating and increased intervals of oil change. The system of crankcase ventilation is gas caprisny. Varnos requires maintenance and repair, wiring to sensors is unsuccessfully laid, oil leaks are not rare. The intake manifold is adjustable and the diesel system needs attention. The throttle linkage wears out the motor and gearbox. And, as in other inline 6s, even a slight overheating leads to problems with the block plane and the cylinder head. The N52 engine is noticeably more complicated and there are more problems with it. The block is also made of magnesium alloy and corrodes more readily, the liners are also cast iron. The injection is distributed. But the operating temperature is higher, the intake is throttleless and the Varno system is more expensive. The valve cover with a built-in diaphragm VKG and the price for $50,000 are consumable, camshaft beds wear out early, it is only good that it is a separate part. The intake manifold here is with variable geometry, diesel breaks relatively often, and the pump is electric. It is reliable only if it was changed to a modernized one after 2010. Those that were put in the cars at the factory belong to the initial, not the most successful variants. However, the chances that you will meet such a one are minimal, they served up to a maximum of 100,000 mileage. Even the 3-liter versions are prone to oil buildup due to aging oil caps and rings, and the N52B25 variant is the most unsuccessful among the 6s. Here, in addition to everything else, the factory piston often cokes, and the engine has probably gone through overhaul. 3-liter versions are marked by increased wear of crankshaft liners. If in older motors the liners went under 300,000, then here it is recommended to check their condition at mileage over 150 and at the slightest signs of oil pressure drop to open the crankcase. Chains serve about 250,000 and on N motors it is not worth to delay with replacement, the chain strongly saws the cylinder head. N53 motors receive direct injection, but they have no valvetronic valve lift height control system and there are usual throttles. BMW's early direct injection is a pain if the first owners didn't change the injectors under warranty. But in general the engines are slightly better than the 52s, less hassle. However, the price of operation is still higher due to direct injection, its connection to dealer service and the cost of spare parts. The supercharged version of the N54 is in many ways better than the conventional N52 and N53. The injection is direct, the intake is conventional with a throttle, but the operating temperature is lowered and the piston is reinforced. As a result, the resource in everyday operation can be even higher than that of atmospheric N52 or 53. Alas, the problems of direct injection are fully present. And turbines MHI are not very successful, good cartridges to them cost less than 10,000 rubles, now such repairs are inexpensive. The problem with crankshaft liners is quite acute, the knee is scuffed really often. They also have enough problems with supercharging, manifolds and other little things. After all, this is the first gasoline supercharged BMW motor for many years. Motors of N62 range are hot, with aluminized cylinder block and thin timing chains, but in general they are still quite resourceful. Representatives of the old guard. When the temperature drops and good maintenance, they can be happy. From unpleasant nuances, low resource of chains and liners. Well and tendency to scuffing at any mistakes of service, from detonation and choice of wrong oil to wear of intake manifold or incorrect installation of air filter. It is useless to say anything about the V10S85. The motor is very complicated and unusual in design. It is pointless to talk about the price of operation. Almost all copies die because of a backed crankshaft, as liners with warranty go 40 to 50,000, further, a lottery. Sometimes it is possible to reach 150,000 mileage, but it will almost certainly not be possible on a worn-out crankshaft. Another rider is usually unaware of the problem and the motor dies. Cylinder scoring is not the main trouble, but it happens too. A lot of problems are caused by the inherently sporty injection control system and complex multi-throttle intake. Diesel engines. If you want a trouble-free and fast BMW, the E60 should be bought with an M57 diesel. Of course, it is not very cheap in operation, but it requires less fuel and money and less often. With M47 the dynamics will be worse, but in general the motors are as strong, and here in 47 of early series are noticeably more troublesome and expensive in service. True, they drive better, and consumption is noticeably less. The 520D version appeared in mid-2005 with a 4-cylinder diesel engine M47D20TU2, 163 horsepower. From the fall of 2007 the engine was replaced by N47D20 with an output of 177 horsepower. Since the end of 2008, the 163 horsepower modification N47D20 appeared again. BMW 525D was initially equipped with a motor M57D25U, 177 horsepower. Since 2007 it was replaced by M57D30, 197 horsepower. It is already a 3-liter diesel engine. Again, towards the end of 2008, a modification with M57D25 power, 163 horsepower. 530th debuted with the M57D30 engine with an output of 218 horsepower. Since 2005, the engine was replaced with a more powerful M57D30OL, 231 horsepower, and in 2007, a significantly modernized version of the M57D30OL-TU, 235 horsepower. Finally, the 535D was equipped with the M57D30 top engine, 272 horsepower, until early 2007, and after the engine was replaced with a 286 horsepower M57D30 top 2 again. This is a significantly modernized version of the engine. No TU2 version with aluminum block was put on the car, only the simple TU in cast iron. The M57 and M57 TU engines are still considered the best BMW diesels. But these engines have their own considerable set of peculiarities, of which the most noticeable are failures of damper pulleys, cracks of the exhaust manifold and oil leaks. Diesel engines blow up intake manifold pipes regularly. Here it is a consumable. M57s also have a bad habit of vortexing intake manifold flaps and getting caught in the intake. We've also talked about this series. We've told you about this series. 2 M4722 motors are simpler by exactly 2 cylinders, have less power and don't sound as nice, but a little cheaper in maintenance. At the very least it's practical. But the N47 is in a completely new block, with chain-driven timing from the flywheel side, and it is the first motor from the series of block engines from the Bavarians, with all the ensuing consequences in the form of unsuccessful timing mechanism, which was repeatedly modernized to improve the resource, and not very successful fuel equipment of the new generation. The motor has probably been repeatedly disassembled, and what's inside is unknown. If it is upgraded to the latest revision, it is almost a B47, a good and quite worthy choice, but if not, you will have to finish it, which is very expensive in the case of BMW and diesel. Detail original price of non-original 2-motor radiator 3, 015 631 NRF 13 158 Nissan's 14 639 timing chain. N52 3614 Ruval 2028 Swag 2 945 Hydraulic Tensioner 3 553 Febi 1 581 Swag 1 809 Timing Kit, N52, not available Ruval 9 165 Swag 8 159 to take or not to take. If you like toys, then, of course, E60 is worth taking. But this toy is expensive and you can buy a newer and in some ways more interesting for the same money. E60 is a great car if you are ready to spend on it, and absolutely terrible if you just need prestige and means of transportation. It's got a lot of its cooler technical solutions and a lot of elements that are unnecessarily expensive. But its basis is strong and it is possible to keep it in good condition. Of course, it is better to avoid extremes. From 4-cylinder motors it is worth to take M47 diesels. Gasoline 4s are not interesting because of the fresh sound, lack of character and the price of operation, and diesel N47 are crude and you should buy them only having a good idea of all the nuances and condition. Other motors are ideal if you choose them under your purse and correspond to the image of BMW. Inline 6s drive moderately cheerfully, have character and sound, and almost all will please with adequate resource and reasonable expenses for maintenance. 6-cylinder diesels are not only practical, but also fast. Solid V8 for those to whom money burns the pocket, and for such fun it is really not a pity. An M5 is not for racers, it is rather for collectors. In conclusion, the BMW 5 Series E60 stands out as a remarkable blend of performance and luxury, making it a sought-after choice for collectors. While its unique features, such as parts from the Shniva and the intricate steering rack, may present challenges, they also add to the car's character and appeal. For enthusiasts and collectors alike, the M5 variant offers an exhilarating experience that is hard to match. Whether you're drawn to its engineering or its potential for restoration, the E60 remains a fascinating chapter in BMW's legacy. Thank you for watching, and we hope this exploration has inspired you to delve deeper into the world of the BMW 5 Series.